Imagine being so disgusted by a food that you'd start a prison riot over it. In the 1800s, that's exactly what happened. The food? Lobster. If you think that's wild, consider this. Today, we're dropping $100 a plate for the same creature that prisoners once called cruel and unusual punishment. And get this, the global lobster market? It's worth a staggering $6 billion. But here's what gets me. This isn't just another rags to riches story. It's about how we turned the cockroach of the sea into the king of the seafood world. And trust me, the real story is even crazier than you might think. Let's go back, way back, to the late 8th century when Vikings were still raiding European coasts. Back then, if you were wealthy enough to get your hands on a lobster, you'd actually show it off in paintings. No joke. Rich Europeans would literally commission artists to paint their lobster dinners. Talk about the original food pick, right? But across the Atlantic, that's where things get interesting. Picture this. You're walking along the beaches of colonial America. After every storm, lobsters would wash up on shore in piles 2 feet high. They were literally crushing them under their feet like we'd crunch through autumn leaves. Native Americans were actually using them as fertilizer. Think about that. The same creature that's now the star of every fancy seafood tower was being buried in cornfields. Now, before we go further, let me tell you something fascinating about these creatures. Unlike us, lobsters don't age the way we do. They just keep growing forever. Well, until something eats them or disease gets them. They're basically the immortals of the ocean. They can regrow limbs like some underwater superhero, and they never lose their, let's call it their romantic abilities. Scientists have found some weighing 44 pounds, though today, most are caught when they're barely teenagers in lobster years. But here's the thing that really gets me. These incredible creatures were seen as nothing more than sea bugs, and the way people cooked them, oh boy, that's where things went really wrong. See, back then, people would kill the lobster first, then cook it. Sounds normal, right? Except there's one tiny detail they didn't know. Lobsters release an enzyme when they die that basically turns their meat rotten before it even hits the pot. So imagine you're a prison guard in Massachusetts, serving what's essentially rotten seafood to inmates. No wonder they were ready to riot. But everything was about to change, and it started with something that had nothing to do with food: the railroad. This is where the story gets devious, in the best possible way. Picture this. You're a railway manager in the 1840s. You've got all these fancy passengers from inland cities who've never seen a lobster in their life. And you've got access to dirt cheap seafood that nobody on the coast wants. So what do? You do what any clever business person would do. You lie through your teeth. These railway managers started serving lobster to their passengers, marketing it as an exotic delicacy. And here's the beautiful part. Because these inland folks had no idea about lobster's reputation, they absolutely loved it. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, because it wasn't just about transportation. It was about a complete accident in the kitchen that changed everything. Some genius chef, and honestly, we don't even know who it was, discovered something revolutionary. Lobsters taste amazing when you cook them alive. I know. Sounds cruel, but here's the science. Remember that enzyme I mentioned earlier, the one that ruins the meat? Well, cooking them alive prevented that enzyme from releasing. Suddenly, people weren't eating rotten seafood anymore. They were tasting lobster as it was meant to be. Now, here's a plot twist nobody saw coming. World War II. During the war, the Canadian government had this brilliant idea. While everything else was being rationed, they started promoting lobster as a patriotic choice. Imagine that. Eating lobster became your civic duty. Meanwhile, in America, something even more interesting was happening. The Rockefellers, only the richest family in the country, started serving lobster at their parties. Movie stars were ordering it in restaurants. New money families made it the centerpiece of their wedding feasts. Just like that, lobster wasn't just food anymore. It was a status symbol. Today, catching lobsters is like running a luxury boutique in the middle of the ocean. These fishermen, they're not just throwing nets over the side. They're using specialized traps, carefully maintaining water temperatures, and following more rules than an international chess tournament. Get this, even when they catch a trap full of lobsters, they might have to throw most of them back. Too small, back you go. Too big? Same thing. Carrying eggs? See you later. And the ones they do keep? They've got to be treated better than first-class airline passengers. We're talking pristine saltwater tanks, perfect temperature control, and enough oxygen to keep them happy all the way to your plate. Now, here's something that'll blow your mind. Even when there's plenty of lobster to go around, prices barely budge. Why? Because restaurants have figured out something fascinating. People actually enjoy their lobster more when it's expensive. I'm not kidding. Studies show that people associate high prices with better quality, so these restaurants keep the prices high, even when their costs go down. It's not just about the food anymore, it's about the experience, the luxury, the story. But here's the most incredible part of this whole story, and it's something that keeps me up at night thinking about it. That lobster you're paying $100 for today, it's exactly the same creature those prisoners refused to eat. Same taste, same meat, same everything. The only thing that changed was the story we tell about it. And maybe that's what makes the lobster's journey so fascinating. It's not just about how we learn to cook it better or how we marketed it differently. It's about how we humans can completely transform something's value just by changing how we think about it. From fertilizer to fine dining, from prison food to presidential banquets, from the cockroach of the sea to the king of seafood. And now, with challenges like bait shortages and changing ocean temperatures, who knows what the next chapter will bring? The lobster market is expected to hit $11 billion in the coming years, but, well, that's another story. And the next time you crack open those claws at a fancy restaurant, remember, you're not just eating dinner. You're taking part in one of the greatest marketing makeovers in food history.